Hey there, welcome to episode 1 of Zero Dark Emissions. The goal of this project will be to tear down and rebuild a military Humvee while also converting to electric. Today's episode will just be a brief introduction. Most of the episodes will focus on the build, but for now I just want to give you an overview of the stock vehicle and then an overview of where we will be taking this. This is a 1989 M998 Military Humvee that I won at auction on Gov Planet. It has a 6.9 liter naturally aspirated diesel. The 6.9 is the larger of the two engines, the other being the 6.2. It has a 3-speed transmission, which isn't great. I think the later models had a 4-speed, probably not that much better, especially compared to more modern transmissions. But mechanically it ran very well. When I first got it, it didn't look like it was in great shape. The top was ripped to shreds and water was pouring into it. It had bald tires and the batteries were on life support. But the engine was very strong, the frame and body were in very good condition. Overall, it was a good vehicle. I did replace the tires and the batteries. I put in a new top and rear curtain and new doors, along with some other minor changes to make it drivable. Also replaced all of the fluids, and they all looked very clean. It looked like it had been well maintained. So it was a very good vehicle, especially for its age. I drove it for about 2 years, which was a ton of fun, but was always planning to tear it down and rebuild it eventually. But towards the end there, I started to have an issue, I believe, with the smart box, where starting it became a little glitchy. I tried doing some simple things like replacing the ground harness to see if that would solve the problem, but it seemed like ultimately it was going to need a new smart box, and I didn't want to invest in that. It's relatively pricey. Knowing that it would not be needed for the rebuild, it just didn't make sense. So I decided to just go ahead now with the rebuild. I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I have never done anything like this before. I'm an architect by trade, and outside of my normal job as an architect, I have done a whole lot of building. I've completely demoed and rebuilt 2 houses with my family living in them at the time, which was very challenging to say the least, but ultimately very successful builds. I've done a number of other construction projects, as well as some furniture and things of that nature. I've done everything from foundations to framing, roofing, siding, windows, electrical, plumbing. I put the new electrical sub-panel in the garage while I'll be handling the rebuild. Pretty much you name it, I'm comfortable in that world. But I've never done anything in the automotive realm. I have a decent amount of book knowledge about vehicles, but I've never really done much in that world. So this will be a whole new experience for me. And of course, the whole EV part of this is a whole different universe. So just to give you an idea of where we're going with this thing, converting it to electric, the basic idea is that we're going to use this big, juicy volume of space at the tunnel, which is fairly wide and has a fairly large volume of space, to place the battery modules. Obviously, that big, generous volume of space is only available to us after we remove some things that are there today. The fuel tank is an obvious one that goes away. We don't need a fuel tank anymore. Also running through here is the transmission coming off the engine. That's no longer needed. Also the exhaust, also going away. And then we have the transfer case and the drive shafts going to both the rear and front. So once we eliminate those, the premise is that we're going to be putting a separate motor at the rear and at the front. And essentially that acts as our transfer case, right? So that you could just run in rear-wheel drive, under normal road conditions. You don't need as much torque, and you don't need torque at all 4 wheels. The single motor should provide enough torque, and we only need it at 1 axle. And so that frees up this big tunnel space. And just looking at this in cross-section, I understand that some of these lines are probably too dark to show up. But like here are the tires. Those line weights don't show up very well. But you can see the tunnel. This is what we're concentrating on, is the tunnel here. And you can see that we have just enough room between these 2 frame rails, the 2 main chassis rails that run from front to back. It would be nice if they were a little farther apart, would give us a little more tolerance, but I think it should work. We'll know more once we tear everything down and get a better look, but it looks like we have the width, and the height is also a little tight, but workable. So it looks like that's going to be kind of perfect in terms of really maxing out the volume there. We're thinking about using 18 Tesla Model S battery modules, which is what you're seeing there. And that fits pretty snugly. After we build a case, the case has to fit in there, and then the batteries have to fit in the case. But from a width standpoint, it looks like it should work. And then lengthwise, after we factor in the other equipment, and just to take you through that, we're keeping the stock differential and everything downstream of that. So the half shafts and geared hubs, they'll stay, both back and front. And then moving upstream of that, we'll have a new gearbox that's needed to get the right torque to speed that we need based on our motor. I'll get into that later. Then the new motor, obviously, and then the same thing at the front. And that gives us a certain amount of length through here left over, which looks like it will give us enough room for 13 of these modules, leaving us with 5 that we will place under the hood. So that's a very brief overview, just generally speaking, of how we're going to take this thing. And I'll get into this more as we go down the line. I'll come back to this CAD drawing as we get into specifics and talk more in depth. But for the most part, the videos are going to be more focused on the build rather than the screen. But I'll certainly come to the screen at certain points just to sort of give a better picture of where we're taking the actual build so that it's a little more clear. Okay, so that's it for now. One last drive around the neighborhood here to use up the fuel. The next episode will be focused on removing the body, and the following episode after that will be taking out the engine and getting it down to the bare rolling chassis. Probably at the end of that episode, I'll probably talk a little more about some more design-oriented stuff as well. But that'll do it for today, and see you next time.